The 2022 TCU Horned Frogs live rent-free in the mind of the greatest college football coach of all time. I'll explain next here on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That's right, Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can also find us wherever it is you listen to podcasts in its audio variety. I'm going to talk about the Arizona game. TCU, they won. They're 7-4. They defeated the Wildcats 49-28. We'll get more into that in segment 2. We'll also talk about the basketball team, where they're at currently. But we're going to start today with a topic that I didn't expect to cover, but late last week, Nick Saban was on Pat McAfee's show, and they were talking about the college football playoff, and they were discussing there's a bunch of SEC teams going into this past weekend that had multiple losses that still had a shot at the playoff, and SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey, media members have been lobbying like, man, you got to make sure these teams get in. Ole Miss is really good, right? They have a lot of talent. Lane Kiffin's squad is solid. Well, they go on the road and they lose to Florida. And it was a crazy weekend across college football. I was talking with my pal Richard Berry today, and we were trading texts back and forth. It feels like maybe this is just a one-off year. We had a very similar situation in 2007 where each and every week there was just chaos. At one point, like South Florida was number 2 in the nation. There were a bunch of teams that had multiple losses. And there was kind of this thought at the time of like, well, maybe college football is finally getting to a place where there's more parity. But ultimately, things kind of reverted back to how they are, where you have a couple of blue bloods that seem to be head and shoulders better than everybody else. But by and large, there's only a few teams that are really competing for a national title. But now we're sitting here in 2024. Indiana loses to Ohio State after they start the season 10-0. Georgia's got a couple of losses. Alabama lost to Oklahoma. It feels like this particular year, there's a lot of parity across the nation. And it's played out in the Big 12 too. BYU falls to Arizona State. Suddenly Arizona State's in the driver's seat. If you go to the Big 12 championship game, they might be your playoff representative in the Big 12. Colorado, even though they dropped a game to Kansas, they still have a chance. Kansas State's dropped a few contests this year. They still have an outside shot at the Big 12 title game. There's all these different scenarios that can play out, and the Big 12 really feels like a league where there's a lot of schools that are very similar in talent level, and there's not much at all separating them from one another. The SEC feels similar right now, but I would venture to say the SEC from a depth perspective is the better conference. And so they're talking about the playoff situation, and Nick Saban mentions that all these discussions are subjective, which they really are, because I think ultimately what these playoff committee people do, they get in a room together, and I know they have all these numbers in front of them. They have analytics, they have film to watch, they have all the things. But I think when it comes down to it, they really just use the eye test and what, their brain thinks about football to tell them who the best teams are. And then once they come to a consensus, they get together and try to put some numbers and some stats and some evidence to their arguments. And then they send somebody out there to basically face the mob and answer the tough questions. It's almost impossible to separate and rank these teams properly because there's just so many different teams, there's so many different conferences, all the things. So Nick's saying it's subjective. And he brings up an example where Alabama got left out of the playoff. In 2022, when they had 2 losses, lost to Tennessee and they lost to LSU. They did not make the playoff. TCU did. And he said, you know what? We would have been a 13-point favorite against the TCU Horned Frogs if we played them on neutral field. If you look at Vegas spreads, that type of thing. But we didn't get in, and TCU did. And he followed up with the caveat of, well, it's not TCU's fault. And then McAfee made a joke about, well, we saw what happened to TCU in the national championship game, or on that run is what he said. And Saban laughed about it, and they had a good time. And we've all lived with that situation for the last 2 years. Yeah, TCU got destroyed by Georgia, 65-7. I don't think the gap between those two schools was as big as it was on that night, but TCU didn't play well. Georgia played really well, and that was the end result. I will take all the S-talk from Georgia fans because they were a machine that year. And they got tripped up by Ohio State, survived that ball game, and I think that was the catalyst for just a complete drubbing in the national title game. But I'm so tired of this from people around the country. And it's become a very common saying among SEC schools. And let me say that a team that got left out of a national title game or left out of the playoff and complains about it, that's important to the fabric of college football. TCU fans have that team, 2014, right? We all think that in 2014, if TCU got a shot, even though they dropped that one game to Baylor on the road, if they had a shot to go play Florida State, Ohio State, Oregon, they could have won a national title. But they did not get that opportunity that season. And I understand that Alabama always has talent and always has dudes. But stop using Vegas spreads as justifications for why a team should be in over somebody else. TCU went 12-0 in the regular season. They lost a close game to Kansas State in overtime in the Big 12 title game. They got to the playoff, and they beat Michigan. It's like people blacked out and forgot that game. That was a good Michigan team. TCU was the only team to beat them in 2 years. Alabama played Michigan the next year in the semifinals, and guess what? They lost. There's no guarantee that they would beat Michigan if they got in the playoff that year. I don't think they would have beaten Georgia. Sure, it would have been a more competitive football game, but at the end of the day, it would have been a loss. Stop using this excuse or this one game, this one blowout, as the reason as to why other teams shouldn't get an opportunity. And stop acting like TCU didn't earn their way to get there. It wasn't like they were 8-4 or 9-3. They went 12-1. Yeah, they had a lot of close calls. Guess what? They won the games. And everybody said they were going to get destroyed by Michigan. They were 14-point underdogs in that ball game. And they won. They never trailed. They ran the ball down Michigan's throat, which nobody said they could do. They did a decent job stopping the Michigan run game. Michigan punched back multiple times, and they had an answer each and every time. They won that game on a neutral field. Stop acting like they didn't deserve to be there. Oklahoma's never done that in the college football playoff era. They've never made a national championship game. There's a lot of schools that you could single out. They've had the chance. They didn't get there. I understand Alabama has a better track record than those schools, but they lost 2 games that year. They didn't deserve to be there. Now, it is kind of funny and sort of awesome that Nick Saban, who's the greatest coach in the history of college football, that this still bothers him. I do get a kick out of that because it's not like he was kind of having a good time when he talked about this, and you could spin it like, well, he's just using an example from his own career. It's not the first time he's talked about this. He's talked about this multiple times. This bothers Nick. So that's kind of cool that a TCU team, which everybody likes to dismiss, is that stuck in his mind. But Nick Saban, you're an amazing coach. You built an incredible program. Please stop talking about how you should have been in the playoff in 2022. You didn't deserve it. You lost 2 games. You didn't make the SEC title game. You didn't deserve to be there. Now, Sonny Dykes was asked about this. I think it was Melissa Trebwasser that asked him about it. And Jamie Plunkett from Frogs Insider posted a video where he was asked, hey, what do you think about this? People are talking once again about how that team didn't deserve to be in the playoff. And he had a great response. It was kind of lengthy. He talked about how good that team was, how hard they worked, all the games they won. But the ultimate response was, we were there, you weren't. So I don't care what you have to say about it. And ultimately, that's what I have to say about it too. You know what? We were in the game. It's very easy to criticize people when you don't get to play. When you don't make it, it's easy to stand on the outside and say, oh, well, if we got that opportunity, that wouldn't have happened. Probably, but you don't know that for sure because you weren't there. Because you didn't win a playoff game like TCU did that year to earn that chance to play Georgia. And they fell on their face, and they deserve all the ridicule they can get from it. But stop acting like they didn't deserve to be in the college football playoff. They did. And when they got there, they won a game. As the philosopher Chris Brown once said, how can you hate from outside the club? You can't even get in. Stop talking about things like that when you weren't there. I will take all the criticism from Georgia fans. But Nick Saban, give it up, brother. You didn't deserve to be there. TCU did. They won a game. They lost a game. But they beat Michigan, which was something that people did not think could happen, to get to the national title game. And you just got to get over it. This is Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team every day. All right, let's talk about one of our great sponsors, FanDuel. Speaking of Vegas spreads and hypothetical games and how they'd be handicapped, our friends at FanDuel make it easy for you. FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. You hit on one $5 bet, you get $150 in bonus bets. Again, that means one $5 bet, you hit on it, you get $150 in bonus bets. FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. Download it today. NBA, NFL, college football, college basketball, NHL. It's all there and available for you. FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. TCU beat Arizona on Saturday 49-28. And the regular season finale will be this Saturday against Cincinnati on ESPN Plus again. This time kickoff at 5 o'clock. Going to be cold in Cincinnati, Ohio on Saturday. So curious to see what the Frogs will do, especially how that offense will function. Really glad that they figured out the run game to a point with Savon Williams, because they're probably going to need to lean on that some. It doesn't look like snow or rain or anything like that's in the forecast, but that cold weather really haven't been in that this year since they went to this very pass-happy offense. I guess the Iowa State game where Josh came in the second half, but at that point we didn't really know what to expect from Josh Hoover. I'm not sure the coaching staff did either. But Frogs won that ball game, and I wanted to point out for a minute, because I know so much of what we're watching now is thinking and projecting and moving forward to, okay, what is this team going to look like in 2025? And I'm really glad that the seniors got their moment on Saturday. I'm happy for Savion that he had a big game. Jack Besh got over 1,000 yards. Wasn't a big game individually, but did hit that milestone. J.P. Richardson finally got a receiving touchdown this year and also had just a big game catching the football, had a nice punt return. On defense, some guys like Johnny Hodges had a big stop on 4th and 2. The list goes on. Bud Clark had a pick. I'm very happy for those guys, because I do think their legacy at TCU means something, given so many of them played in that Fiesta Bowl game or were part of that remarkable run in Sonny's first season. But we're thinking about, okay, what's the future of this team? Guys like Marcus Deal at defensive tackle who stepped up and done a really nice job. Those stud linebackers like Cooper McDonald and Devin Deal, who have made some plays, especially in the second half of the season. We've seen them start to emerge. And offensively, one guy that I wanted to point out, because he's been doing this really all year, but Saturday he just looked very comfortable, and there were multiple moments in that ball game where I was like, this guy's the future. You're losing a lot off of this receiving room. 3 guys that spoke together in the post-game presser on Saturday that I talked about a minute ago: Savon Williams, J.P. Richardson, and Jack Bash, right? They're all moving on. Hopefully they go on to have really good NFL careers. But they won't be here. So all that production is gone. And I think this is an area where I've said, like, listen, I trust this coaching staff in developing and recruiting this particular position, especially because they've done a great job of it since Sonny's been here. That's quarterback, and I guess quarterback to a point, and wide receiver are the 2 spots where I'm like, yeah, I'm not super worried about them having talent there, or at least having guys that fit their system and can be productive. Jordan Bailey should have a more expanded role next year. Kind of TBD on what it looks like for Major Everhart. There's some young guys like, Terry Shelton, who'll be coming in as a true freshman, Kyle Baker, Braylon James. But a dude who's had a good season, somewhat quietly, is Eric McAllister. 639 yards on 28 receptions and 4 touchdowns. He's averaging 22 yards per catch. He had 87 yards on 3 receptions against Arizona. I mean, the cool thing about it, too, is limited receptions in all these games. The most receptions he's had all year in a game was 6 against SMU for 114. He had 4 for 100 against Kansas, and one of those was huge on that kind of broken play where Josh is trying to get the ball out of his hands, and he suddenly finds Eric near the sidelines. He catches it, shakes a tackler, and takes it to the house. He had that 85-yard touchdown catch against Texas Tech. That was the game winner, that back shoulder fade. They did that a few more times against Arizona, where it's just 1-to-1 on the outside and he goes up and not really goes up, but if Josh puts it back shoulder, he's able to kind of use his body as a shield, snag the ball, and get out of bounds. And he's also really good once he gets the ball in his hands at moving. He did that against Arizona Saturday. Had one where he catch a crossing pattern. He got some extra yards. There have been a few times. There was one in that game Saturday as well where Josh put it on his back shoulder on a in-breaking slant, where it's like, man, if you could just put that on his chest, like he's able to get upfield. But he's big, he's physical. And honestly, one cool thing about Savion getting moved around the formation is it's given him more opportunities to line up on the outside. Because I say this understanding this is not a criticism. I love Savion. I really do. I think he's a good wideout, and I'm really happy for him that they found a way to use him effectively within the offense by putting him at quarterback and putting him at running back in the I formation or in a single back spot or, next to the QB. But I think McAllister might be a better just wideout. Like Savion can be used in a lot of different ways. And because of that, he's going to get drafted highly, also just because he's got the physical gifts that a lot of people don't possess. But just from a pure, lining up on the outside, making things happen in one-on-one coverage, aside from Jack Besh, I might put McAllister at number 2. And it's honestly why when I was projecting before the season, I didn't account for Besh being on the outside, but I thought it was going to be Eric and Savion, on either side of the formation pretty much all year long. So I'm stoked that he's going to come in and be able to make some plays and make some things happen moving forward. He really stood out to me on Saturday as just a guy that's like, man, this is awesome that he should be able to step in and just right away kind of be wide receiver 1 moving forward. Another young guy that has impressed me lately is Travis Jackson. He's gotten more playing time. It's been awesome to watch him. And he had half a sack on Saturday. He was getting to the quarterback. So I like how he's emerged. Next year is going to be big for this defense. And a lot of it hinges on the defensive line. I think they're going to have to get better at linebacker too. But if they can get more consistent play from him, then that'll be a huge boost for that room because they need more dudes who can wreak havoc and get things done. And I don't know if this guy's going to be back next year. So, but I wanted to highlight him because he's listed as a senior. Cam Smith, the Memphis transfer, he's dealt with some injuries at safety. He plays safety, and so he hasn't been in as much as maybe we expected before the season. But, man, he was physical on Saturday. He had a great tackle on a jet sweep play. He had another open field tackle on just a run play where he scraped around the outside and was able to get somebody on the ground. And he just looked really good and really athletic. And I don't know if it was the first time he had been healthy, but there were a few times during that ball game where he popped off the screen and you're like, man, that's awesome to see. Ryan Hughes played a little bit on Saturday at tackle, and I thought he did a good job. I think one decision the staff is going to have to make this offseason, plus Harris will be moving on. If I were them, I would go spend some money for a tackle. I think you need one. You don't necessarily have to go get 2, but there's a world where the season could start next year and it's Ben Taylor Whitfield on one side of the line and then Ryan Hughes on the other. And those are your guys that are holding it down on the perimeter. I wouldn't feel super comfortable with that. I think maybe Hughes could play, maybe Whitfield could play, but I would feel more comfortable if you went and got a real deal tackle that has a lot of experience, put him on one side, and then you had the 2 young guys battle it out for that other spot. Because I think interior line wise are going to be okay. I feel like they finally have enough depth there where they're starting to build to a place where you have multiple dudes that can play. But I believe you need more of a veteran presence at that outside tackle position, at least one of those spots, one side of the formation, so that you just have more opportunities there and somebody who can hold it down. But we'll see how they attack that in the offseason. And there's one more game to go against Cincinnati, and we'll have a preview of that throughout the week. We'll come back and get some of your thoughts after the game on Saturday. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team. We do it here every day. Time to talk about Gametime. Gametime, download the app today. You can get $20 off your first ticket purchase if you use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege. Again, that's LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase. Gametime, they make it easy for you. They show you exactly what you're going to see when you sit down, the view from your seat. They also don't have hidden fees, so you know exactly what you're going to pay when you go to checkout. Gametime, they have flash deals and last-minute sales up until the day of. So don't feel like you have to pull the trigger 3 weeks in advance. If you're a planner and you want to do that, you can definitely do that. But you can also wait it out and see if those ticket prices go down. Even, I think, 30 minutes into the ball game, you can still purchase those tickets and use them. It goes straight to the app, not to your wallet, not to your email, just straight to the app, and you can get it there, give them that QR code, and get in. Gametime, best place to buy tickets on the secondary market. Okay, a few random assorted notes within TCU athletics. The TCU women, they won on Sunday, had a 4:00 game against Idaho State at home, and they pulled off the victory. Final score was 86-46, pulled away in the second half of that ball game, which was good to see. They're up to number 17 in the country after this latest poll update. They were 19th last week, and the schedule continues to get tough. They'll take on Notre Dame on Friday at 4:00. So Notre Dame's number 3 in the nation. Another good test for Mark Campbell and company to continue to stack up victories and get national respect. But Notre Dame's rolling right now, so that's going to be a tough football game. The men, they'll be back in action on Thursday on Thanksgiving Day against Santa Clara at 3:00. So if you're not into Cooper Rush versus Tommy DeVito, Cowboys and Giants on Thanksgiving Day, make sure you're watching Santa Clara and TCU. That game's on CBS Sports Network. They lost to Michigan. They won their game against Alcorn State this past week. Got some time off. Hopefully Ernest Uday is healthy. You know, he was dealing with an injury. That was tough to see. We'll see if he'll be back and where they're at moving forward. TCU in soccer, they fell in the round of 32 to Penn State on Friday afternoon. Final score was 1-0. Eric Bell's squad continues to do great things, and I mean, it's cool to see what he's built, but just not quite enough to get to the second weekend this year. But won a home game, round of 64 game, and just fell a little bit short against Penn State. It was a good squad. TCU men's tennis, one of their doubles teams, Pedro Vivas and Lou Maxid, they are your national champions. So fall tennis starting up, and they'll have the ITA Indoor Championship in the wintertime, and then they'll try to defend their team championship this spring. And I actually saw the national title matches this year will be in Waco. So hopefully people can get down there to see it as they try to get 2 national titles in a row in men's tennis. Finally, some of your thoughts from that win over Arizona on Saturday. And the final score was 49-28. Zoom Play is praising the Lord for a TCU victory and thinks they're going to get into a good bowl game. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, if you finish 8-4, I feel like the Texas Bowl's within reach. Maybe the Pop-Tart Bowl. We'll see how it shakes out. There's a lot of tiebreakers that need to get sorted out with the Big 12. Frog fan says he's headed to Cincinnati for the ball game on Saturday. So good luck, man. Hope it's good, and hope you have a fun time up there. We need to get off the schneid in Cincinnati. The TCU basketball team, the men's basketball team, they went up there and lost last year. Baseball got swept, so some bad vibes in Cincinnati, Ohio for TCU sports. Football team would go a long way in correcting that by getting a victory. And Jacob Langford said, great home finale. It was beautiful weather, and Arizona fans were nice. The team that showed up against Arizona and Oak State is one we expected all year. I'd agree with that for the most part. I mean, I think obviously the competition plays into it, but I do believe that we are getting closer to seeing this team in its full form. And, you know, I mean, it stinks. You can't go back and change it. If you hold on against UCF and show up against Houston, we're talking about winning and walking to Arlington, you know, next week. But it's just you got to learn from these things. Sometimes you got to take some losses to learn, and hopefully that's the enduring lesson here for this core group is like, all right, we went through some, valleys together and figured it out and fixed some things and just improved as the season went on and then carried that over into 2025. We'll have more tomorrow. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts.